so wonderful to see you all here at the last minute. Earlier this week, and I don't even know what happened, Jamie said, get a room. And I said, well, then you got to get people to fill it too. You want to get a venue at the last minute. And she put a note out on Facebook. And Keith Murphy, who runs this, at the last minute jumped in and he said, I'd love to have you. And he gave us this wonderful room. Now, before you applaud him for that, years ago, when Abigail Schreer's Irreversible Damage came out, I wanted to get a billboard put up, advertising that, and the billboard was above his other restaurant in Manchester. And right away, someone in Black Block came with a spray paint, and he endured that. He kept the billboard up. And 2 years ago, and somebody may have been here for this, Cohn made a visit. We were booked at the Holiday Inn, and the TRAs and trans rights advocates pressured them to cancel it, and Keith Murphy pitched in. So a big hand for Keith Murphy. He has two favors to ask of you. One is, when you're done here, spend money, drink, and eat something, because this is a fantastic gift he's given us. The other thing is, the trans rights activists immediately came in and started giving him the one-star reviews on Facebook and on TripAdvisor, and yet great positive reviews. If you eat here, write about that. If not, you're all here. Talk about what a wonderful venue it is, and it is here. So thank you very much for coming. And I think all of you know Jamie Reed, who put this together.
Thank you so much, Steve. I'm so excited to be here. And yes, you're right. I literally just sent you a message like 5 days ago. It was like, we need to just do an event if we're going to be here. We wrote, Cori, Simon, and I wrote some ground rules in the drive up after we learned that there were going to be some people here who might not be interested in what we had to say. So we're just going to put out our ground rules for everybody. We would ask that you listen to the speakers in good faith without interrupting the program and give the courtesy of the benefit of the doubt. We are going to do a long Q&A, so please save your questions for the Q&A. Please actually just ask a question and try not to just ramble. If you want to give a speech, you can organize your own program and you can invite people back to your speech. Give respect and get respect, and thank you for your attention to these ground rules. So I'm going to introduce our two speakers and myself, and then all four of us are going to take about 10 minutes tonight, tell our stories a little bit, have a little bit of engaged dialogue, and then we're going to open it up to hear from you all next questions. So Cori Cohn is a podcaster, an advocate, and a writer who explores the intersection of gender identity and public policy. Cori underwent sex trait modification procedures beginning at the age of 18, which is more than 3 decades ago. Cori has testified in Indiana, Texas, and Ohio, and welcomes the challenge of testifying here in New Hampshire. Cori is a dear friend of mine, and one of the first people to reach out to me after the Free Press article came out, had me on your podcast, but also just welcomed me into the movement. So I really appreciate Cori. Simon Amaya Price is a Desister, a writer, and a speaker dedicated to win this fight against gender ideology in a way that aligns with our core American values. Simon has written articles for the Boston Globe, testified in favor of numerous bills. We just testified last week in West Virginia. We're trying to close a loophole there. Simon has been featured in articles in the Daily Mail, Boston Herald,
Okay, so this is about 50%, so I apologize if you know a little bit about me, but I can give some background because some people don't. I was born in 1975, I'm going to be 50 in June. That's scary. Yeah, really? Gen X? Hey, we're Gen Xers. Wow, we're turning gray, that sucks. In 1990-ish, I was having a lot of problems in school. I thought that if I were able to become a girl, that a lot of the problems that I was dealing with would simplify and go away. I had problems getting along with other boys, understanding them, and it was a lot easier for me to befriend girls at that time. Very introverted, and I went to see a psychologist. I had a diagnosis that I had, I think it was called transsexualism in the DSM at the time, but at any rate, that put me on a pathway to eventual medicalization. I started taking estrogen when I was 18 years old, and when I was 19 years old, I had what is colloquially referred to as sex reassignment surgery. That is the removal of the gonads and the plastic surgery to create a facsimile of the opposite sex's genitals. So for me, and for many, many males, for men who undergo this procedure, it is unsurprisingly damaging. I was 19, I did not realize that what I was going to go into would be something that created a permanent sexual dysfunction. And nevertheless, I was well on my way to try to live my new life. Now, I want to try to contextualize this a little bit, because as a teenager, I did not make friends very easily. I felt terrible about myself. And the very first thing that started to happen when I underwent these procedures or this process is I started to have more self-confidence. I started to feel good about myself. I started to give assurances to my family who were so worried about me that I felt better than I ever had. And indeed, in some ways, my life had some tangible improvements to it. But as years went by, I was never able to get to a point where I felt like I had finished transition. In fact, every single new obstacle that came up in my life, or every new major change that happened, did not happen to me just as any other person. It was me being a transsexual or disguising my sex. And that creates a very weird sort of burden to carry when you're trying to represent to all of the people who have known you after your transition that you're this thing that you are not and cannot be. So while there were some positive effects, in the long run, there's maybe a big spike and things just started to slowly slide and slide and slide. Personally, this is just my story. Personally, I think that this is inevitable for anybody who transitions and for whom the transition did not answer the question of why am I here? What is the meaning of my life? What is my purpose? What am I here and supposed to do? And I think the vast majority of people end up asking those questions more and more as your life progresses. You gain mastery and knowledge and connections with other people. These types of questions start to matter. When you're young, everything is just flashy and in front of you, and it's of the moment. But as you get older, understanding who you are and where you came from and what your legacy is going to be in the world really starts to matter a lot more. It's not as fun, but it matters. And I don't believe that most people who go through this are going to be satisfied that disguising themselves as the opposite sex is a worthwhile legacy or to be remembered by their friends and their family members. And so, the thing that I would want to do here in New Hampshire, not just to tell my story, But I want to think about the children who are growing up in households with parents and therapists and doctors that have not had this realization about how important authenticity is. Not in the sense that trying to help somebody become their true self, but authenticity in the sense that you wake up and you have your commitments and your friendships and your obligations, and that these are the things, your duties, these are the things that you have to do every day because people are depending on you. It's not something that you can wake up and have a self-realization about what your true self is. Your true self is something that you practice every day, and that hopefully you have opportunities to get a little bit better. Because as everybody here knows, sometimes you let people down, sometimes you screw up, you make mistakes. And through the process of correcting those mistakes, or sometimes other people let you down, through the process of forgiving other people's mistakes, you create these bonds together and you support each other. It's so hard to do when you are disguising your sex. So for these kids that do not have the benefit of adults who understand this, I want to make sure that those children have a few more years of innocence so that they can hopefully start to understand these things. Because this is a slow process. You don't wake up one morning and go, crap, why do I have gray in my hair? Oh, I'm also a responsible adult today. Right? It's a gradual process. So hopefully, if we allow kids to have normal puberties, then that will give them more time to adapt the challenges of their bodies. All of us in here know what that's like to have to try to get used to what your body is. These kids deserve that chance. Puberty blockers denies them that opportunity to let their bodies develop and for them to get to know who they are actually, not who they imagine themselves to be, not their ambitions of what they'll be, but who they are every single day. The surgeries also, right? It's not just the hormone blockers, it's the surgeries also. All of these things divert a young person from being able to adapt to and learn about their bodies. So my goal coming here, telling you a little bit about that story, giving you some assurances that even for the people who've undergone these procedures, nobody is ruined from having gone through this, but you do have challenges that in a just world are not things that would have been imposed on you. So for these children, having just a few more years of innocence, that's what I'm here. Jimmy?
Bear with me, I have some slides I want to show you.
So while Steve gets set up, I just want to let you know, please feel free. I'm fine if you're tweeting. Cori's fine if you're tweeting. Simon's fine if you're tweeting. Steve is fine if you're tweeting. If you're on Instagram, Facebook, it's totally fine to say that we're here. You can clip us, but we're also live streaming right now. So if there are people at home watching this is being live streamed, it is right now on X as well. Because Elon bought it and we can have real conversation.
So I'm Scaer. I trained as a special education teacher, and that's one of the things that, in addition to a family tragedy and just enjoying reality, the things that pulled me into the activism that I do. At the time I was doing it, I was banned on Facebook, I was banned on Twitter, so I started going out, just talking to people on the sidewalk about these things, and also going into the State House and testifying. And what I heard the most of is about me at sidewalksteve.org, on Twitter, on sidewalksteve, on X. So at this point, I think any of us up here are frustrated that we even have to hear about suicide anymore related to this issue. In December, there was a Supreme Court case, U.S. versus Grimity, and it was all about whether states can have laws like we're looking at in New Hampshire tomorrow at our hearings, limiting or banning puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones for sex changes. And Chase Rangio, who identifies as a transgender man, admitted that there's nothing to this suicide myth. And I'm so used to people saying source that I just wanted to play this for you, what he said in the Supreme Court, what she said.
True in every respect, but on page 195 of the CAS report, it says, there is no evidence that gender-affirmative treatments reduce suicide.
What I think that is referring to is there is no evidence in the studies that this treatment reduces completed suicide. And the reason for that is completed suicide, thankfully and admittedly, is rare, and we're talking about a very small population of individuals with studies that don't necessarily have completed suicide within them. However, there are multiple studies, long-term, longitudinal studies that do show that there is a reduction in suicidality, which I think is a positive outcome to this treatment.
Let me ask a question about another issue that came up during just.
So there you have it. As far as the long-term longitudinal studies, I'm not sure that I would agree with Chase Rangio about that. But they're saying that this whole idea that children who identify as transgender are in immediate risk of suicide, and they're going to commit suicide or die of suicide unless you do the social affirmation, puberty blockers, hormones. Arguing in front of the Supreme Court, the ACLU's lawyer said that's not true. If there were ever a case to make for suicide, that would have been the time. But the hearings that I've been to and that I've heard, medical professionals and mental health professionals are still saying, if you pass this law, children will die. Because if they find something that works, this movement, it doesn't matter if it's been discredited, they will keep repeating it. 2 years ago, in front of the New Hampshire House Human Services Committee, I heard the worst example, the manipulation of this. And this was Dartmouth Health physician Simran Ball testifying to the committee. And what she said, absolutely outrageous. The suicide rate among trans-identified youth was as high as 40%. And I want to this is a master class in manipulation. She did there. Part that I didn't have is she lists her credentials because she's the health expert, making that clear to the lawmakers. And then she starts with a very moving anecdote about this emergency story and a young person bleeding and injured. Now, if you've ever had to go through suicide prevention training, one thing that you learn is suicide is complex. It's never due to one cause. But from this one visit, she makes it clear it's an unaffirmed gender identity that's causing this attempted suicide. And then there's the dishonesty, the sleight of hand. She says suicide rates are as high as 40%. Just blatantly false. Then she backs away from it and says, well, imagine if there's 100 people in this room, 40 of you would have attempted suicide. Very, very different number. We're going to talk about that in a minute. What she was actually quoting, and I try to keep up with these things, and I knew right away, it wasn't a 40% suicide rate. The Trevor Project's annual survey of young people, this is an advocacy group, said that 41% of LGBT young people seriously considered attempting suicide in the past year. And if you go to these hearings or you listen to them talk, it will switch. It'll say attempted suicide, considered suicide, and then they'll give you the exact same number, and then they will say suicide. And it's a sleight of hand that's constant. If you go to any of these hearings, have the discussions, read the articles. So where do these numbers come from? One for about, the biggest one is the Transgender Equity Group, another political action group, does a U.S. Transgender Survey. There's been two of them. One back in 2015, the newest one in 2022. They're an activist organization. They're making it really clear that they're getting this data for political purposes. It's not a scientific random survey. So what they do is they recruit people. They're saying, hey, please fill out the survey, and they work with other groups. And they have parties and prizes to get these survey results. The other one that I just talked about was the Trevor Project, and they solicit survey results online, on social media. So it isn't a random survey of what's going on. And they make it really clear what they're looking for if you look behind. They're looking at suicide risk. They want to confirm suicide risk. And then later on, these surveys by political groups are mined for what passes as scientific evidence in our major medical associations. And they publish this stuff because they're captured. So this is where the data comes. If you see studies that say that transgenderism cures suicide, autism, anxiety, depression, that all comes from these online surveys. There's nothing scientific about them. So one example you might, if you go to the hearings that you'll hear is puberty blockers save lives. And a lot of that comes from, there's a researcher, a doctor named Jack Turbin, and he went back to the 2015 survey, and what he determined from that is, well, people who wanted puberty blockers and got them based on the correlation, they were less likely to feel suicidal. So then that was published in the American Academy of Pediatrics in their journal, major thing. And all you did was look for a correlation from the survey. Now here's the funky thing. And I realize you probably can't read the footnote, but they're just, people like I said say, source, where did that come from? There's a footnote in this survey back in 2015, and it says, a large majority, 73% of respondents who reported taking the puberty blockers, reported doing so before the age of 18. Now, I don't know if any of you are familiar with puberty blockers. The idea is you take them to block puberty. And puberty for most of us ends by the time that we turn 18. But 3/4 of them said they took them 18 or after. In other words, this is absolute garbage evidence. Now, to their credit, the Trevor Project didn't include those above 18 in the final tally. Well, why would you think this was at all accurate? There's other big problems with this, too, as far as saying that it saves lives. We're going to focus on this. The Trevor Project, what comes up with the other things, the correlations for other things you hear. For example, using pronouns improves mental health. This comes from this correlation, and correlation of lower attempted suicide if laws, it's the other correlation here that you've probably heard of, even having legislative hearings about puberty blockers or hormones, that causes suicide, so don't even talk about it. So these astronomical numbers that come up, so this is from the 2024 survey. It says that 46% of transgender youth have seriously considered suicide. And 12% of LGBT people have attempted suicide. Well, that's awful. So let's compare it to all the youth. And this is from, once a year, the CDC does a youth risk behavior survey, and for all the high school students in the U.S. And according to this, seriously consider a plan about suicide. 17% of all high school students have done that. Now this is important. I'm sorry, 22% have considered that. 30% of all girls, high school girls, have seriously considered attempting suicide. 1 in 3 high school girls, all girls. But notice the difference. Boys, it's half of that. 14% of boys have seriously considered suicide. Attempting suicide. In the past year, 10% of all high school students attempted suicide. 13% of all girls report attempting suicide, and 7% of all boys. The good news is the actual suicide rate, according to the CDC, for 15 to 24, so just a little bit, it's a different age difference, but you get the idea, is 0.0136%. It's tiny. So we've got these huge numbers of kids attempting suicide, hardly anyone carries it out. So what's my point here? That there's attempting suicide. Coming up with a plan about suicide really doesn't have much to do with the suicide rate. Now this is where things get really weird.
I'm so sorry, sir, I know it takes a lot of courage to get up in front of other people and talk about these issues. This is really hard to understand. I want to follow you, but I just don't understand what you're talking about. What point are you making?
Why don't you hold off to the question section, and then you can ask the questions of me or anyone else. But does everyone see that suicide attempts are common among teens? Important. And does everyone see that actual suicides are very rare? And they're rare in regular teens, and they're regular in teens that are considered transgender. So people are using these fake figures to blackmail you. But here's what's just fascinating, is that this is the top bar is males, the bottom bar is females. Males across the board are 4 times as likely to die of suicide than female. Half the population, 80% of the suicide. But if you took these reports that you get from the Trevor Project seriously, it would tell you the opposite. That girls should be twice as likely to be dying of suicide. So these figures, and that's the question I ask, are self-reports of ideation and attempts that are given to you all the time in these articles and in these legislative hearings. Are they meaningful indicators of completing suicide? Now, before the CAS Review studied this, and this was a 4-year independent study in England, and what they found is that suicides are rare, They are higher among trans-identified youth. But trans-identified youth, all of them have something else wrong with them. Autism rates are just astronomical. A lot of them have been through trauma, depression, and when you factor for those, the rate's about the same. So why the lies? And they are lies. They know this, the medical profession, and they keep repeating this. Because if you said, without testosterone, your daughter has only a 99.9% chance of surviving through the next year, and hormones won't improve your odds, that's not a good sales pitch. But what's really, really horrible about this is in 2017, a suicide prevention handbook endorsed by GLAAD and HRC, which are the LGBT advocacy groups at the time, said, don't attribute suicide to one cause or one law, because doing that normalizes suicide. You're telling kids, if this law passes, you're in danger of dying. And now you hear that all the time when you go to legislative hearings. They're willing to make these kids martyrs for these laws. So it's so bad that we were getting some pretty threatening emails regarding this event. You saw the protesters out there. People believe that even us talking about this will result in suicide. And this was a good example here. Just me hanging out with my sign. And this is common. I'm there with my police camera.
That's great. So here's the thing. The suicide rate among trans kids, you may not understand, and you may be fortunate that you never had that experience. But sometimes you can go on here and read that and kills itself. And that's not true.
So even talking about it like we are tonight causes suicide, having the laws, suicide, and if you don't affirm, of course, that results in suicide. And when there are suicides, something else that happens is the activists will change the story, the details to fit the narrative. The child becomes a martyr. You'll hear about the candlelight vigil, and it's horrible exploitation that becomes out of that. So just one thing that I'd like to end with is, for any of you, I don't know if you have any lawmakers here who are dealing with this. How do you deal with it? The best way is to do this directly. And this was at a hearing a couple of weeks ago. And a woman was saying that her 4-year-old had attempted suicide. And she's sitting there, how do you deal with that? And I love, this is Rob Sampson, a senator in Connecticut, how he dealt with it.
6 years old and is now an adult. Gender-affirming care is literally life-saving for those in the trans community and my child in particular. She's someone who has known her entire life, since probably 18 months old, that she was transgender. She was telling us at age 2 nonstop, insisting that she was a girl. One of the things that kept us from letting her live as her authentic self early on was the societal pressure, and it was tremendous. It was tremendous for her to the point where by age 4 she was already talking about not wanting to live. She couldn't be herself, and by 6 and a half she tried to take her life.
If I heard you correctly, did you say that the journey for your daughter began when she was 2 years old, that she approached you and said that she identified as a female?
Well, in hindsight, it was actually 18 months old, but we didn't know. We figured, we're just going to have a date. Nobody was talking about transgender anything back, all those years ago. And so yes, by age 2, I think like 2 and a half, like when she was speaking, as soon as she was able to speak, she was saying, I'm a girl, I'm a girl, I'm a girl. And we're like, no, you're not, no, you're not. And she was insistent, and she would gravitate towards, we had like nothing girly in the house, and she would take shower curtains and wear them, the rings on her ears as earrings, and towels as dresses, and shirts and towels on her head as her long hair.
So the big takeaways are, no, gender-affirming care doesn't save lives. And there's other people here that know more about the statistics than I do. The evidence isn't there, and so these numbers are concocted by using indicators from suicidality, attempted suicide, which are actually very common among teens, and then these are used to blackmail lawmakers and worse, parents, and also in bad science too. And when people come to you with these numbers, ask where they're getting these numbers. Are they really suicide? So if you have any more questions about it, at the end of the questions section, I'd love to talk to you, or even after when there's time to talk. So thank you very much.
Hey everybody. Thank you so much for coming to this. It's really heartening to see so many people caring about this really important issue that affects so many kids and a lot of adults and really our most vulnerable children and our most vulnerable young adults. I want to give a shout out to the lawmakers who are here from New Hampshire. Thank you so much for introducing the bills I'll be testifying at tomorrow with my friends over here. I want to thank you to the owner of Murphy's for allowing us to use event space. With that said, my name is Amaya. Today I'm standing here, a 20-year-old man. For 3 years, I thought I was a girl.
Can you speak up a little?
Absolutely.
I don't want to miss it.
Yep. For 3 years, I thought I was a girl.
Thank you.
I got you. I remember being 14. I had just spent 2 horrible years at Boston Latin School. I was the target of basically daily homophobic bullying, kids making fun of the fact that I was rather overweight. I was about 60 pounds heavier back then than I am here today, and a little bit shorter, so you can figure that out. I could roll down a hill lengthwise, actually. So I think this one story sums it up best. I was in 8th grade, and it was the day after I had come out to my parents as bisexual. And I was talking to my friend in my English class about it. And I was saying, my mom took it well, she was very supportive, and, my dad said, so what, grabbed a beer and then went to bed. And after, when I was explaining this, the kid sitting in front of me turned around and he said, Simon, guess what? What? Thinking he was going to say chicken butt or something like that. And he said, you're a faggot. Now, I was kind of used to this, but it happening in class is another level. And so I tell the teacher, and the teacher says, yeah, Ethan, you're short. And to be fair, Ethan was rather short. And I don't think he really heard me the first time, so I repeated myself. And my English teacher in 8th grade said, oh, I thought he called you fat. So that was a pretty, exemplary moment of what I was going through when I was in middle school. And I decided to switch to a new school for, self-explanatory reasons in 9th grade. And over the summer after 8th grade, I wanted to become a new person. I lost about 60 pounds over that summer. I started wearing completely different clothes. I mean, I kept the pants, but other than that, I switched it up. Bow ties, coats, button-down shirts, all that jazz. And I come in, and I'm basically unrecognizable to myself, and to a certain degree to my parents, and the one friend I had who carried over. And, I remember my first day of 9th grade, I was waiting in the hall for my biology class, and the senior comes up to me, and she asks me, hey, are you one of the new teachers? And, I was very aggressively autistic back then, so I didn't realize that I had an opportunity to get up to some shenanigans there. So I decided to be, truthful, and I said, no, I'm actually a freshman. And we ended up being friends for a bit. And two big events happened the fall of my 9th grade. A number of my friends left me without explaining. I came to school one day and I asked them, hey, why aren't you talking to me? And they all said, you know what you did. And I did not know what I did. And all my friends happened to be girls. And what I now know is this is pretty female typical bullying where, boys will like punch you in the face or call you a slur. But girls, you don't realize it's happening until 2 months later. And I was not socially tactful enough at this time to be able to comprehend that sort of bullying. So I was not in a very safe place, and so I go on a school trip, and we're seeing this musical called Fun Home. Great musical. I think it's about a young lesbian who lives in a funeral home, or like her dad works in a funeral home or something. It's dark and the lights are down, and while this is happening, an older boy who's, I believe, 18 at the time, gropes me inappropriately in a way that I did not consent to and was not great. And I told the chaperone about this, and he didn't take me seriously, he didn't believe me. And I'm like, oh, it's no big deal. But in reality, this had a really big effect on me. I looked around and saw that when the girls my age or in high school said that a boy did this to them, even if it was a specious claim, they would immediately be believed. But for some reason, nobody believed me. I felt like nobody had any sympathy for me, and looking around at the media landscape, everywhere I looked, growing up in Boston, men and masculinity were really painted in a negative light. So, I was dealing with the way of internalized homophobia, internalized misogyny, and now being sexually assaulted. And I then started seeing a therapist because, as one would expect, I was not doing well. And I started searching for answers. As anything would do, I went to Google. Started Googling. I found some interesting things. But one thing in my health class, I was introduced to this graphic called the gender uniform. And if you don't know what it is, it's kind of oriented, it's bright and colorful, oriented for elementary school kids. And there's this cartoon unicorn. And there's like little symbols of the heart and the brain and the genitalia and things like that. And it presents gender identity, gender expression, sex, romantic attraction, both sexual sexual attraction and romantic attraction, all a separate kind of spectrums. And this is the first time I've been introduced to a theoretical way, like a theoretical paradigm to understand these sorts of things. I'm like, this is interesting. So that the teacher asked us to point out on each of these spectrums where we were. I was like, okay, I'm bisexual, that makes sense. So straight down the middle on the romantic attraction, the sexual attraction. But gender identity, gender expression, well, I'm not quite like the other boys, so there's something weird about me there. And, at the same time, I was looking for answers, looking for somebody to talk to about what happened to me in middle school. And my school had a GSA, which is Gay Straight Alliance or Gender and Sexuality Alliance, something like that, depending on the school. And one of the regular activities we did is we would watch YouTube videos by this transgender YouTuber, male to female, called Contrapoints. And this is where I first learned about gender dysphoria. And he presented a very concrete list of steps you can take in order to cure this condition which I had just heard of. And I did Googling, I read about the symptoms of gender dysphoria, you don't like making friends with people of your sex, you're uncomfortable with your secondary sexual characteristics, all of these sorts of things that I fell into because I was very uncomfortable with my body hair. I didn't like puberty. I didn't get along with boys my age. I had atypical interests, all of these different sorts of things. And I I concluded that, well, I must have gender dysphoria, and by consequence, I must be transgender. And I felt this very deeply. It wasn't just a theoretical thing. And once I figured this out, I'm like, that's the answer. I want to go full steam ahead. So I come out to my therapist, I come out to the PSA, and they all affirm me. They say, you're so brave. They give me all this social approval, which I hadn't gotten before. And I still remember, I was sitting in my pediatrician's office. I was 14. And it was like a couple weeks after before my birthday, I believe. Might be wrong about that, though. Don't quote me. But this is what happened. I was sitting in the pediatrician's office, and I was explaining to my pediatrician that I came out to my father as trans, and I was feeling this gender dysphoria, and that my father didn't affirm me. You know, my father said, "No way in hell you are," you know. And my pediatrician asked my father, who was in the room, "Would you like a dead son or a living daughter?" And looking back on that, I mean, that's emotional manipulation, it's malpractice, you can call that many things. I had a total of 3 different doctors who referred me to GEMS, which is the Boston Children's Gender Clinic, but I never was. And a lot of parents of transgender children ask me, and they're like, what stopped you from medicalizing? And the best thing I can tell you is that it was 75% luck. 20% my dad saying no, and 5% my own critical thinking skills. Because I've met so many detransitioners, and the difference between me and them is very small. It's sometimes even imperceptible. And that weighs on me. So I went to college 2 years early, and there I met a bunch of other trans people. It was also the first time when I saw a double mastectomy scar on a young girl who was 16, who had gotten it the year before. And it's a little bit of a horrifying sight if you haven't seen that before. It's this massive braid of scars which goes all the way across the chest. And it was new, so it's very much out of a horror film. And I met a lot of other trans people, and I realized, wow, I really don't get along with these trans people. They're all defending communism and stuff like that. And I was never a communist. I don't know what the Venn diagram looks like there, but it's like, after I desisted, it became a circle. So I started realizing that many of the same logical errors they were making in their arguments about communism, they were making about their transgender identification and why gender-affirming hormones and stuff were good choices. I'm like, maybe I'm making the same mistakes that I realized I was. And I was like, well, if gender's imaginary and we made it up, then why am I changing my body because of it? I was like, okay, I want to stop doing that. That would be stupid. And that basically led to a series of events, which ended up in me desisting and transferring to Berklee College of Music, my second year of college, until graduation. In December, I graduated. I'm still 20, I mentioned that earlier, but I graduated with my bachelor's in recording and production, cum laude, and I did additional coursework at Harvard University in statistics and other math subjects. And the reason I mention that is whenever I talk about these things, the first thing somebody does, a lot of the theories do, is they make appeals to authority. They're like, well, this authoritative person says this. What gives you the right or the authority to talk about this? And I'm like, well, you can ask my statistics professor at Harvard, and he'll say that I got an A in the class, I was one of his best students, I understand statistics. I can send you my transcripts and everything if you want. So, the reason I'm here at the end of the day is because last fall, I was taking a class called Songwriting and Social Change. And I like social change, I like songwriting. It's, was taught by one of my favorite professors. Okay, let's go for it. And so, one of the culminating assignments for the class was to put on an event about a social topic we really cared about at Berklee. And I said, I want it to be mine on Desisters and detransitioners. And I talked to my professor about it, I talked to my classmates, and they were like, great, let's do it. And we went over all of these different parts. And so it was October, I think. It was October 14th, 15th, something like that. I started my promotional campaign. And I put up the posters around, I made Instagram posts. Next day I woke up to over 400 hate comments on my Instagram posts. Things like, you should walk off a cliff. You should be scared for Sunday, in reference to my events. I'm going to come and throw expired groceries at you. You transphobic piece of shit. You're a Nazi, etc., etc., etc. The typical sort of stuff. Now it probably has like a couple thousand. Before my event, 2,000 of my classmates signed a petition to cancel my event. There are only 6,000 students at Berkeley College of Music. For the rest of my time at Berkeley, walking down the street, it was like 50-50 chance that somebody yelled, Nazi or TERF or transphobe or something like that at me.
Oh no.
And, oh no, what are they going to do? They're all weak musicians, so they can't do anything.
But I will say seriously again, though, we are asking you to be respectful of the speaker, and if you do not want to do that, you're welcome to leave and wait to ask questions at the end. Thank you.
Thank you. So my event got canceled after the Vice President of Berkeley assured me that would happen, but he went back on his words and then lied to me and then tried to gaslight me, and he made the claim that minors in Massachusetts can't consent to gender-affirming surgeries, which is wrong. I can send you the PDF of the law if you like. I offered to do that to him, and he said no. And then he stood up, and my dad was in this meeting with me actually, and he started yelling at us to get out of the top. He's a pretty good guy, so I kind of read it as, he was trying to physically intimidate us. And, he actually had to sign my diploma, which makes me feel happy at the end of the day. So I got pretty mad. And it's October 21st, and I'm coming, home from Berkeley after this meeting. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to respond to this press inquiry I got from the Daily Signal. I'm going to reach out to FIRE, which is the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression. After I did that, things started snowballing. Now I'm here. I've testified a bunch of different places. I've been to DC for a conference to end gender ideology at the Heritage Foundation. The last place I expect myself to be. Like, I was at 3 a.m. I was having a snowball fight with Chloe Cole outside of the Heritage Foundation in Washington DC. The last place I, of all people, expected to find myself. And so I've written a op-ed for the Boston Globe. I think Jamie mentioned that. And I've had opportunities to testify and talk to so many wonderful people who were involved in this issue. And I met my girlfriend through this actually at the beginning of January at the aforementioned conference, who was a detransitioner. And I think on the statistics note, on February 25th, a new study came out, published by the Oxford Press, with 107,000 sample size matched cohorts of U.S. patients on, I believe it was cross-sex hormones and surgeries and mental health outcomes afterwards. It showed that rates of depression doubled, rates of anxiety similarly increased. This is the single largest study we have had on that specific topic ever, period. Most of the studies that people cite are either not longitudinal, which means that they don't follow up past 2 years. The issue with that is most people who transition don't realize that they were wrong until 7 or 8 years. There was a survey done on the detransitioner Discord, which showed that the average time they identified as trans was like 6, 7, 8 years, so that's a long time. We need to account for that in the science. And then, my girlfriend, for example, took testosterone for 4 years, and then only after that did she detransition and regrint. Most of the studies people cite are, it's 2 years, it's a 2-year follow-up, most of these studies. Secondly is they suffer from very high dropout rates, and they have very low sample sizes, which means that any findings they could possibly have are statistically insignificant. Every systematic review we've had every large-scale scientifically and statistically valid study we've had have told us what we all instinctively know, that these interventions do not help children in the long run, and in fact, they harm children mentally, physically, and permanently. I am deeply worried that we live in a world where we let this happen. We have not seen this level of ill-informed ideological medical experimentation since World War II, and I will fight anybody on that assertion. The same drugs we are giving little boys who are autistic and bisexual and gay a lot of the time are the same exact hormones we gave Alan Turing in Britain after they found out he was homosexual. We can't let this continue to happen. It is a travesty, and I'm quite ashamed to call myself American when I'm talking to people from abroad, because guess what? Abroad they're doing this a hell of a lot less than we are. In Europe, we look at Finland, we look at the UK, we look at Sweden, we look at Norway. All of these countries that a lot of people, a lot of TRAs look up to, have actually reversed course. They have conducted their systematic reviews and they have concluded that this doesn't work, this makes things worse. Yet here in America, we have our American exceptionality, and we're saying, wow, this really stupid thing, if we do it, that means it'll work out. But when they do it, it won't work out, because we're American.
How's that working for us?
Not very well. Have I been talking for 10 minutes yet? And it's great. Okay. All right, thank you for listening to me blabber on.
Thank you, Simon. I love working with you. You're doing such a good job. You speak so eloquently. So I will go and then we'll have time for questions. I want to first very briefly describe to you how I got here. But before I do that, I'm really interested to know, are there any parents here tonight with affected or kids who are grandparents and parents? Okay. So my life has changed a lot in the past 2.5 years. I want to see if we can talk a little bit about where I feel like this might be going. So many of you know that I medically transitioned children for nearly 5 years, from 2018 to 2022. And I worked as a case manager at the St. Louis Children's Hospital. I knew when I blew the whistle that no child should transition, that no child should socially or medically be taken down this pathway. About a year ago, I was invited to speak at a parents' conference, and I left that weekend with a lot of really deep conflicted feelings and understanding for those families with children who are in this 18 to 25-year-old cohort. I left feeling really conflicted and uneasy, and I knew that I had this deep unease with these young adults. Simon kind of is in this cohort still too. And I struggle because I believe that adults have legal rights that children don't have, but also nothing magical happens to the brain the day that somebody's born. So I've sat with this discomfort and I've observed. So I've observed the adults around me who have transitioned, and I know many, and I count many as friends. And I think many of you know that I lived with and co-parent now with somebody who medically transitioned as an adult. And I quietly watched as they struggled with these profound medical harms, and I couldn't do CPAP machine. And then at a certain point, she tipped over into the diabetic range and she was given diabetic medications. And I would simply try to point out that these comorbidities could be directly tied with the testosterone. And I would ask questions when she got back from the doctor's office. I would say, if the doctor is continuing to prescribe T at this level, have they ever suggested lowering the dose? Or have they talked to you about the fact that they're just piling on more pills, but they're still giving you the T? And my questions were met with anger, and I was dismissed. And at one point I was told, I'm not a doctor, and how dare I presume to know more than one. And so I occasionally would send her some medical articles, and I would point out some of the research showing these correlations and sometimes these clear causations. And at one point, my former spouse finally got up the nerve to ask the doctor prescribing testosterone. I think that this is harming me. I think, can you help me figure out a way to lower the dose? And her doctor's response was, oh, well, we need to schedule your hysterectomy. And I was completely in shock. She came home and told me this, and I said, this is a pipeline that only flows in one direction. They don't know how to turn the water back around. And I was just in shock that somebody could pointedly ask her doctor, I think that this is hurting me, help me lower the dose. And the only response they could give was, we need to cut up your body further and risk more complications. And when I had that interaction, I imagine that these are the kind of experiences that if you have children in this, that you learn to kind of how to navigate. But what I was finding myself doing is I was learning how to stay silent as I just watched these harms increase. And that kind of forced silencing is really what erodes these relationships. It creates these entire realms of things that are now off limits. Topics that are supposed to make your relationships with your kids or your spouse functional and whole. You're supposed to be able to talk about health and wellness and future planning and your longevity. And what I was finding is once these topics are taken and they're put into the off-limits category, all they do is grow and metastasize and get bigger to the point where it felt like the one thing that I could not talk about was the only thing that I wanted to talk about. And then I felt like I just shouldn't speak at all. And the thing is it just feels so hard when the one thing that you feel like is worth saying is the only thing that you can't tell your loved one at all. And there were other elements with this relationship that I really struggled to talk about, but I think that it relates to parents as well. I think that trans identification asks for us to make changes that we don't agree to. So when your child might ask you to use a different name or pronoun, you didn't agree. When they ask you to say son instead of daughter, when they ask you to take photos off the wall, you're not really being given a choice. You're kind of being given a do this or you lose me more, do this or I erode further. So when my former spouse's transition got further and further along, it reached a point where they totally passed as male. And so for any of us in same-sex relationships, all of a sudden, I was in a straight one. And I found that my own sexuality was slowly erased, like that photograph in the movie Back to the Future. And it was so gradual, but it was so profound. And it was really strange to me because being same-sex attracted is just, it's not about what happens in the bedroom. The parts about me that make me be a lesbian are how I always feel at home in my body in different ways. So I'm not stereotypically female. I'm really loud. I'm super bossy. I am a really shitty navigator. I don't rumbling. So I'd be outside carrying heavy materials, and I heard from my spouse when I would come in, "You're emasculating me." And I would know, it's absurd, because I would say, well, wait a minute, like, this exact phrase, and she would say, "You're making me look bad to the neighbors." And I was like, but we're in the same set, what is happening here? Like, I was just totally erased to the point where the things that brought me joy were pointing out the why of the transition. And that's where transition always asks us to sit in the why, sit in the why. And I heard the same advice you probably heard. Try to maintain a relationship, lean into other things, talk about anything except for trans. But then imagine my position. Trans was my day job. It was my expertise. It became what destroyed my entire career. Got to the point where the relationship deteriorated until a point where it just wasn't any longer. So now I suppose that I can make all of these claims of the realm of trans. I'm an industry whistleblower. In some ways I'm a desister, and now I guess I'm a trans widow. And I'm the kind of trans widow that nobody makes the documentaries about, because I'm also a lesbian. Trans, I feel like now, cannot be framed as an individual choice. When activists say this, and they say things like, this is just a decision between an individual and a doctor, they ignore that this very decision actually requires of us that we all collectively agree to participate. So we agree, then, that the outcome of that private decision in a doctor's office will lead to a change on a legal document. And that leads to a high school girl losing her sports scholarship to college, which then leads to a man in a women's prison, which then leads to a woman sharing a bathroom with a man, which then leads to the collective destruction of the entire lesbian community. That leads to detransitioners in pain, that leads to desisters, and that leads actually all the way to the Supreme Court, where we heard a case. And it leads to people like little old me having my career implode. And it leads to all of you having to make a decision every single day. Do we continue to agree with the lie of trans? Do you keep your child on your health insurance, knowing that means they could access wrong-sex hormones, but also means that they're covered in case they're in a car accident? So in this last year, I spent more and more time considering trans and advocating publicly against children transitioning. And I've just met more and more of these detransitioners who are in this 18 to 25-year-old range. And I think I'm now at the point where I'm ready to really consider the position that I think we need to say. I think trans has been a global experiment over the last roughly 70 years. There have been sex non-conforming people from time immemorial. And sure, some trans sex non-conforming person built the pyramids. I'll give you that. But I think we're at the point where we need to address that this has been an experiment since the time of synthetic hormones. If you've not read the book by Bob Ostertag, Sex, Science, and Self, I highly recommend it. It's super short. Gay man wrote it. Bob now cannot go into coffee shops in California where he lives because he wrote this book. We've been conducting this societal level experiment, and I now believe we have enough preliminary data to consider a few conclusions. So first, nobody can change their sex. We have tried with the best available hormones and surgeries. We simply cannot change a human being from male to female or female to male. It cannot be done. We can approximate and deceive, but we are born and will die as either male or female. Because we cannot change sex, we can only ask of society to go along with the deception. We have consequences that we might not have considered, but we have now seen them spill out and occurring everywhere. And these consequences impact profoundly women, children, families, school systems, sports, public accommodations, prisons, medical systems, law, and whole economies. And I think if we truly considered all of these costs in terms of dollars, in terms of the disruption, in terms of even the expenditure of human capital, I believe that we could rightly now conclude that the experiment of trans has failed, and it now needs to be universally addressed. Some of consequences are completely unexpected. I think that very few early transsexual men in the 1970s would have ever predicted that we would now have this rapid rise of teen girls demanding testosterone at 13. I think that many of them consider their personal demands to be rather personal, and that it would only affect a small limited number of people. But this is what happens when we unleash new technologies. We can never anticipate all of the changes that they will unleash, and we must be prepared as a society to readdress and reconsider and redefine what we collectively are going to choose to continue to embrace. So I no longer believe as a society we should embrace the experiment of trans, and that we now need to begin to consider ways to humanely and compassionately find ways to conclude this study. And I find that this humanity needs to be of the utmost importance, because I know that you care about your children as individuals, just like I care about my former spouse. I care about my former patients. They should be treated with compassion and with our humility, because we have collectively allowed for societal level deception to be attempted, and we have collectively failed. We should all consider the ways that we can humanely address those who have already been transitioned, and find humane ways to address the distress that led too many of them to attempt at this deception. But we need to begin to ensure that legally we use no more ground to the word gender at all. We need to remove all legal pathways for the deception of trans to be recognized. We can set a date, and we can grandfather those in who have already been medicalized if we so desire. We could age and stage the grandfathering in. We could listen to those who have already legally changed documents, and we can find ways to address their concerns while we still be very firm as a society that we can legally recognize only sex. And then we actually need to address the homophobia and the ways that we embody our sex. Because so many of those who have transitioned or have sought out transition are gay or lesbian or just sex non-conforming. We need to expand our acceptance from the way that we embody our lives while firmly embracing reality that we are sex beings. And again, we are born as male and we will die as male, or we are born as female and we will die as female. And we need to teach children that there is no one way to be a boy and no one way to be a girl. But you are only one of those things, and that will never change. So I don't know what this next year will bring for New Hampshire, for all of our blue states, or just years after that. But I do believe now that I know that I will spend the rest of my life dismantling this horrible experiment that has gone so very wrong as we try to find compassionate ways to rebuild our society. Twofold answer. So the money is made in surgeries. So So the one thing about the center I worked in is when we opened in 2017, we anticipated that we were going to have 50 patients total ever. Like they built the program out thinking that that would be the maximum. In medicine, we think about it as a bathtub for pediatrics. The faucet's in, it flows in, new kids come in, the drain is also open at the same time because they're aging up. So they thought the deepest the bathtub would ever get would be 50 patients. I had 1,500 unique patients documented in like 24-month period. So it was exploded. The one thing about the money in the endocrine division, though, is most kids who see an endocrinologist have, does anybody know the condition that most kids see an endocrinologist for?
PCOS.
No, I think younger kids. Diabetes. That's exactly it. So most kids go see a pediatrician, a pediatric endocrinologist because they have type 1 diabetes, not type 2. Most of our type 1 diabetics actually are on Medicaid. And so pediatric endocrinology often is in the, is it black or red? When is it bad?
Red.
Okay. Most pediatric endocrinologists operate in the red. They're almost all billing Medicaid dollars for type 1 diabetic kids. When our clinic started seeing the numbers explode, they literally said to us, oh my God, we're in the black in this division for the first time. So it was a mix. So they're like, there is money. There was money coming in, puberty blockers, it's surgery, puberty blockers, and cross-sex hormones in terms of billing dollars. But the doctors that are in it are almost all ideologically based, but there is some money component for the hospital systems.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I just wanted to put some numbers to this question. The lifetime cost on average, estimates vary, for transitioning a child or an adult is about $100,000. If you're making $1 million for every 10 patients you treat, what would you do as a doctor or a hospital administrator? Secondly, I think that oftentimes ideology follows the money. People change their beliefs once they stop making money off of things. Whether the ideology comes before the money or after the money, I think is really the question. Because there are a lot of these doctors who genuinely believe 100% everything they're doing. And there are definitely doctors who know that they're making a lot of money off of it and are very happy about it.
Aren't they just doing what's best for their kids, though?
So
Nope.
if you have the mic, you are more than welcome to ask a question if you want to put your hand up. But I think this is probably going to be the second time. And so if we get to third, I paid for private security, they can ask you to leave.
Second time what?
That I've asked you to stop interrupting.
I don't think it is.
Sorry, then.
I hear you, though.
Okay, so I think you would like to ask a question?
First warning.
There you go. There you go.
So I have a medical question as well, a healthcare question actually. I work in ethics, and I'm doing some research right now for a local healthcare provider. They're trying to figure out how best to speak to people who are trans-identified that come in. This would be acute or emergent care situations where people are coming in trying to pass, or in some cases fully passing, as the opposite sex, demanding to be treated according to the sex protocol, the sex-based protocols for that opposite sex. So, for example, a man who identifies as a woman coming in and saying, you need to treat me as a woman, would they in the hospital know, if we do this, we're putting you at medical risk? Because we know the sex-based protocols that, for example, with cardiology, it's two very different standards. And then being threatened with lawsuits if they don't treat in a certain way. So my question to you would be, how would you speak to medical administrators about how to handle that sticky situation when they're truly trying to treat the patients on healthcare? This is not gender-affirming care they're providing, but they're truly trying to treat their patients as well as they can in these acute or emergent situations, but the person is saying, no, I want to be treated according to these other protocols that might be bad for me.
Well, I apologize. This isn't going to exactly hit it. I'm going to try to get
No, I know
close.
it's very specific.
Yeah. Who remembers Twilight Zone? Alright. So I've been going to year 3 now, trying to find a doctor who will work with me to help me get on a low dose of testosterone. And the hospitals that host clinics, the gender clinics, have a very high rate of being completely taken in by this ideology. So the last doctor I saw in my in-network said, we don't give women testosterone in this clinic. I have this reported also. I said, well, what sex am I? She said, well, you're hormonally female, which cannot be true. I don't have ovaries. And just taking an estrogen patch does not make you hormonally female. But this endocrinologist at the hospital thinks so. So I am trapped trying to find adequate care. I have been blacklisted by one of the other endocrine practices in town trying to get assistance. So your scenario, I have the mirror version of it, which is the patient is saying, you don't have to try to preserve my transition. That was their excuse. I just want to be healthy. But they were very frightened that somebody's coming to them and saying, I don't want you to call me any pronouns. I don't want you to affirm my gender. I just want you to treat me like a male who has had an orchiectomy and now needs some help with some side effects from that. They won't do it. There is a gap between what the truth is and what people are willing to do in order to overcome that gap, both from individuals who identify as trans, and now it's not sufficient for them to dress differently or change their names, but want even the medical protocols to completely change. By the way, this summer I did go to the Democratic National Convention in Chicago, and Planned Parenthood refused to give me an abortion. I was outraged. So there you go. But some of these doctors are completely wrapped up in this. I will mention one quick thing on this, and everybody should realize this. There are every professional in law and medicine has to take continuing education credits, and there is a cottage industry training the doctors and training the lawyers on how to implement gender ideology in the courtrooms, in the operating rooms, and this is what we're fighting against.
So Cori does not know about what happened in France, though. Okay. Well, so a trans-identified man went to an OBGYN. The OBGYN office said, I can't help you. You're a man, but I'll be nice to you, but I can't help you. And that OBGYN was sued and had a huge settlement and had to apologize also publicly. So all of that comes back to law, though. So the reason why the OBGYN was able to be sued, though, is because the French law had taken out sex and put in gender. So I think part of this is going to have to come back to, legally speaking, that hospital system has to figure out what is reality and then abide by it.
Well, they do adhere to biological family. It's a Catholic medical system, and that's what they have to do. But they're trying to administer to patients and be loving.
Some of this
do
is just
their best.
educating. I'm here to take care of you. Your body needs to be treated in a certain way.
That's a really good way of putting it. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you for being here. I have a question, especially for young man, Simon. You said when you were doing socialization with your peers, those transgender kids, you mentioned that you feel like they were kind of in China, when Mao trying to erase gender differences, the agenda is to make everybody not individual, but more like a collective society. You are one of the numbers, you are one of the robot machines, and so you all have to be loyal to certain beliefs. So how do you say, why do you say that? Why that group supposed to be mostly oppressed, which is what we learned in China too, oppressor versus oppressed, typical Marxism. So why did you say that they want to worship, believe that kind of ideology? They don't see any similarities. They don't know the history, but they believe in communism and with your group. So what do you think that, what do we believe really? Is that from school or what?
And would you stand, please, when you answer so we can see?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. What I saw in my peers and continue to see in my age peers is not Chinese communism. It's a parallel thing. They originate from the same set of ideas fundamentally. But what happened is that Marxism was very popular in academia for decades and still is. There are self-proclaimed Marxist professors all over our university system. Communism doesn't work. But so later in the 20th century, this school of thought called postmodernism came along. And the guy I like talking about here is Cohn. He was a French philosopher, and a lot of these postmodernists were super morally relativist. They deconstructed what they saw society to be, not just like gender and sex, but also the idea of logic and knowledge itself. They didn't see a separation between power and logic and knowledge. So when you take these ideas, you combine them with Marxism, and then you dumb it down a little bit more, that's what you get in the peers I have. And I think the thing that happens is you're right, there is a homogenization. There is a belief, there's a double think that everybody is simultaneously all equal and a blank slate and all the same. That you can teach anybody anything, anybody can have any job, anybody can become anything, while at the same time, people are so fundamentally different in the context of society that we must treat them differently and give them special privileges based on how we perceive the level of oppression of their group. It's the suppression of elements, basically. There's this hierarchy. By identifying as trans, I was able to climb that hierarchy. Does that answer your question? I think I scratched the surface. School. So, it's a combination of social media and in school. I mean, there are definitely Marxist professors at my college. There are definitely Marxist teachers in high schools for sure. I was going to say, I don't think there are, but there are. Especially if you look at TikTok. I mean, it's different now, past couple months, but if you open TikTok and you scroll for a bit, you're going to find people promoting communism, socialism, etc. And these kids are so illiterate and ignorant of history that they don't understand just how bad communism is and just how bad these ideas they're inheriting are going to come back and hurt them if they're implemented. And it's also based on envy. A lot of these kids are kids of rich parents. They hate their parents are rich, so they hate moneymakers. This is not because fundamentally, psychologically, you really listen to them and you really have these 2-hour-long conversations with them. It's not because they believe everybody is equal or they want everybody to be equal. It's because they don't like the people who are in power. They don't like the capitalist class. And they think they could do it better and they would be the just dictator.
Hello, this is, I guess, for anyone that would like to answer. How would you respond to criticism that your stories could be used by those who are actually homophobic to pursue general anti-LGBT policies and attitudes? Thank you.
So number one, don't say LGBT. TQ plus, that's a completely different thing than LGBT. I don't want to be associated with these people. Jamie doesn't want to be associated with these people. We have lesbians in the audience who don't want to be associated with these people. A lot of those people will claim that they are LGBT. A man who is attracted to other women, is not a lesbian under any circumstance, regardless of transition. So yeah, I think you're right. There are certain people, because of this push to group in TQ plus with the LGBT, who on the right especially will start villainizing the LGBT. I mean, there was one state senator out on the West Coast or something who said, I introduced the marriage protection bill, which, means that gay marriage wouldn't be recognized anymore. And that's an issue. That's an issue. But that comes from this unsophisticated understanding of the issue that gender identity is real and imagined, and we made it up, and we're medicalizing people because of it, and there are these horrors that are going on. Sexual orientation is a real thing. We can measure it. We have studied it well. We can put somebody in an MRI, and we can show them pictures of attractive men and women, and we can tell neurologically what their sexual orientation is. There is no such study. There is one, but it's bullshit. That shows a similar thing with the transgender stuff. So that is something we need to be aware of. We need to be very careful about who we're working with and who we're helping. But honestly, I want to be able to, so I'm bisexual, I would like to choose who I marry, not because a law says I can't marry a man, but because I, choose to marry a woman if I decide to do so. And so I have a, dog in that fight. A lot of my friends are gay and lesbian. I want them to be able to get married and have rights. But and this is going to be pretty controversial, but if I had to choose between the castration of young lesbian, gay, and bisexual kids and gay marriage, I would choose to shoot gay marriage and get rid of the castration of lesbian, gay, and bisexual children.
Do you know how many times I've almost tweeted that exact same thing? That I'm really, yeah.
So I hope that answers your question.
We've all worked with Republicans in state after state after state. Have you ever had any homophobia directed to you or experiences?
No.
I've worked with Republican legislature across the country. I've never had any experiences.
I will say that there's a diversity of viewpoints all over the place. But every Republican that I've worked with has been respectful, thoughtful, and considerate. Yes.
Hi. This question's for anybody. You guys are live streaming right now. What advice do you have for somebody who wants to detransition but they're scared?
That's a big question. Okay. Good question. So right now we know of 2 organizations in the United States that are out there trying to work with people in this situation. So one is a group called Therapy First. They run therapy programs. You can get therapy provided at cost, like if you have financial barriers. They're all over the United States. These are quality professional therapists who will walk somebody through that process, because I absolutely believe that requires therapeutic support. And then the second step is that there's a new group that's going to be pretty much rolling out on D-Trans Day of Awareness in DC in a few weeks. They're going to be called the Resilience Health Network. So they are looking to put together a network of physicians across the United States. Because one of the biggest issues is if you are on some of these treatments, you just cannot cold turkey some of this stuff. Puberty blockers are also often implanted. You cannot get that. You can't get this out on your own. You can't do a lot of this. You need medical guidance and care. So they've put together titration guidelines. So ways to step down off of hormones in a controlled kind of pathway. For people on testosterone, this is a steroid, and coming off of this does have a significant number of side effects. You'll see people with headaches, sleep disturbances, weight change, appetite will change, mood will be disrupted. It really does serve people best to do this guided with a professional. These are the kinds of things, though, that we have to build these networks. We do not have enough physicians even willing to see people like Cori. Yeah, we can't even get physicians right now to see patients. Let alone the surgical care is going to be a huge kind of next step. So if you are listening and this is something that's crossed your mind, know that there are thousands of people that are here to help you, and you can go right now to the Therapy First website and find a therapist to support you in that.
I think you talked to some of the very practical aspects of this,
Yes,
and how people can assist if they're not in a transition state. But the question is, what about people who are afraid? Well, I just want to mention a few things about this. When you transition, when this cohort transitions, trans becomes your friends, becomes what you do in the morning, becomes what you do at night, becomes what you do on TikTok and Snapchat and YouTube, and all of your friends are trans, and all of the ideas that you are allowed to express are in support of the trans vibe, the trans, whatever is allowed. So what about people who don't want to identify as trans anymore and they are scared? Ask a parent in here what it's been like when they have a child who identifies as trans and their friends turn their backs on them because they are less than fully supportive. It's going to be a very similar experience for these young people, and it is for detransitioners, having their trans friends turn their backs on them, to gossip about them, to talk about how they were never really trans in the first place, and that those were the ones that had the mental health problems, but not us. And then another one detransitions, and there's that one that had the mental health problem, but not us. They were never trans, but we are. So we have to be cognizant of anybody who wants to desist from the identity needs a lot of support available. They're going to be humiliated because they have dragged their whole families into participating in this deception. They have demanded to be called by certain names, by certain pronouns, and backtracking on that is very difficult. My opinion is that there's not going backwards for anybody. Instead, you have to have a new plan to go forward. So I personally don't call myself a detransitioner. I'm still moving forward towards something, leaving some things behind me, but you have to move towards something. It's not adequate to say, I don't believe in trans anymore, because there's still a crisis of knowledge or a crisis of meaning, and there has to be ways of rebuilding that meaning when it's gone.
I'm a writer, and I was just wondering, what can we do to support you? I mean, you talk about that you need support, and what can I do?
go to these things, not everyone is nice to us. Sometimes it's lots of, something they always brag about is, look how many more of us there are than you. Now, a real reason for that is a lot of these folks have, as I said before, they've got other conditions that interfere with full employment. This is also, as Cori said, well, autism has, I'm a special education teacher, autism has a tremendously high unemployment.
Oh, you're absolutely correct.
So, and this is a chance to get and as Cori said, they're building their lives around this. So anytime anyone is coming up, any sort of bill, even if you don't want to testify, you show up. It's awful. I was looking at Jamie testifying recently, and there's all these people scowling behind her and sneering. It's not a comfortable thing. It takes some courage to be just there, like one or two people supporting her in person whenever you do that. And yeah, it takes a sacrifice. A very specific thing you can do, because if people are going to start to trickle out, is there's a glass fishbowl back there. Put money in it. And it's everything that we do. The trans rights activists have all the money in the world. Now we know where a lot of the money, that money was coming from. But we just rely on people like you. They aren't rich people. We're not Hollywood. We're not the big corporations. $10, $20 goes a long way. And Jamie's working on a budget as well as other people. So time showing up and money. That's all we can ask for.
Do you want to testify to that? But you can also write it. I sent a press release out to every single PR station, PBS station, every single journalist in your whole network, in your whole region. Nobody, one got that back. If you're a writer, write an op-ed, write a letter to your paper, write to your NPR ombudsman. Yeah, and ask them to cover this issue, because they're also not covering it.
And come back and eat here, because without excellent hosts like Keith Murphy letting us be able to congregate here, we wouldn't even be able to get the message out. So thank you again. Please commit to come out and dine.
Thank you.
Just real quick question regarding what we as regular people can do. Does it help, for example, to write and call in representatives to get them to co-sponsor and support legislation? That would be helpful.
Yes.
Thank you.
As one of the representatives, yes, that helps tremendously. Thank you. You were talking about all the supports for people who are detransitioning or desisting. And you also mentioned this has been a 7-year-long experiment. Back in 2018, our conversion therapy ban in New Hampshire was rewritten in a way where I think they thought it was compassionate to include gender identity. But when you actually read the law, it makes it a one-way valve, where you can't even follow that circular path that the now discredited W path talks about. You can't even loop through an exploration. Do you think that changing that is critical in order to be able to help these young people?
First of all, my wife reminds us that one really important thing in New Hampshire is anyone can come up to testify. So we have 2 bills tomorrow at the State House. One, legislative office building. One, banning puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones for sex change. The other for mastectomies. So showing up and signing up is a big deal. I don't think that when that conversion therapy ban went in, it was ever done with any sort of good intentions. It was establishing in law what they couldn't establish in science. No one can tell you, and this is a favorite thing I do on the street. I was just doing it out there with this protesters right here. What's a gender identity? No one can tell you when one of the protesters agreed with me that it was entirely imaginary. It's whatever it is. But now we have a law that says it absolutely can't change. And if you try to change a young person's gender identity, what is he or she going to do? They're going to die of suicide. That's a straight answer. So it was establishing in law what you couldn't do it right away. If a girl says, I think I'm a boy, and the therapist knows, this therapist can't say, even explore, you know, what are the bad parts? The girl says, I'm a boy. What are the bad parts about thinking about a girl? What led you to do this? My law, and this is the medical practice too, the American Academy of Pediatrics, all they can do is affirm. And it's not just medically. When you go through a school and you see all the cozy little safe space stickers on the doors, remember, I work in schools. That means that that person is going to affirm any of these delusions. So these bans, conversion therapy bans, weren't established by any sort of science, and they were really established with bad intentions.
Are you the, well, Clifton, do you want to try to get another question? Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, that's a big deal. That's impacted me personally. I was able to find a therapist who worked out my underlying problems, which was instrumental in my desistance. I can't give you his name because he would have his license revoked under Massachusetts law. We had a similar thing as you guys have in New Hampshire. Additionally, that's one of the big things that we're looking at in New Hampshire, maybe. And then also I'm working on with a rep in Massachusetts on that right now. So.
One, two, three. Yeah, that's it. And you're the last. Okay.
So it seems apparent to me that a big part of the 21st century trans phenomenon, as distinct from like classical transsexualism, is that it's deeply rooted in consumerism. People are being sold this package of goods, and they're paying with their body and their long-term health. But for many people, the idea that it's actually worth it is really powerful for them. So, it's either, these young adults or these parents who are buying and selling this for their 18-month children, which is crazy. But it's like, what are you getting for, what are you buying? You're getting social clout, you're getting the community, you're getting this, and most importantly, you're getting this sense of meaning, which is a deep, human need, the need for meaning, right? And so it's important that part of what we're doing here is not just saying, this is fucked up, we shouldn't be doing this. We also need to acknowledge that underneath all of this is this sort of need to fill the void with meaning. And so we need to offer these people who are both struggling, questioning, and even people who are really dying to help. We need to give them this opportunity to find meaning in something other than just self-harm. And
I think you actually you are correct. Yes.
So please indulge me for 15 seconds before my question. Jamie, I'm involved in a couple of parent support groups online, underground, because we have to be. When your story came out in the free press, it did so much for us in the way of giving us hope, which we didn't have much of back then. It made a huge difference in the lives of more people than you'll ever know. So thank you. Thank you so much. My question is, you call them whatever, progressive, liberal, Democrat, whatever, friends and family, they don't listen to me. Can they be reached? Is there a way?
I don't know. I was very naive. I thought that understanding the science and understanding the evidence and understanding the history and everything would just make sense and it would click. The more Democrats on legislative bodies that are now slowly starting to ask me questions, I really think they believe in institutions just so much. And we're asking them to go against every institution that they believe in, and I think we terrifying.
Yep.
I mean, the most recent one, the legislator asked me, is there any institution in the U.S. that's come out against this? Don't tell me anything about Europe. Don't tell me anything about Europe. Okay, and they said, well, the American Surgical Association. But he was so terrified that I was asking him to even think that your institutions are broken. Because if the institutions are broken, then it all crumbles and falls apart. And I think that they're just so afraid that we're asking them to really embrace that you have to do this on your own. And yes, all their institutions are probably broken. So I don't know if we can get over that fear. And so I'm close to just saying the Republicans can have me and we can come to a really good agreement about homosexuality. Yeah, I'm quite close.
I live in Boston and I study music in college. I had a habit of talking to, they're not liberals, they're progressives, they're Marxists, you can call them Democrats if you want. You can't reason somebody out of a position they didn't reason themselves into. You can't reason somebody out of a position they did not reason themselves into. What you can do is you can identify why they believe what they believe. And there are two major reasons. There are emotional reasons, and there are mimetic reasons. When I mean mimetic, I mean as in like imitation as in means. The slogan, trans women are women, it's not an argument. But if you hear it every single day for 5 years, you're going to start subconsciously believing it. This is how humans work. We are not rational all of the time as much as we would like to be. In many ways, this is a collective action problem. If all of my friends believe this one thing, why would I want to believe a different thing? Why would I want to speak up and say I disagree with you? What needs to happen is we can't directly change somebody's mind who really disagrees on this issue. What we can do is set up an environment that is conducive to them coming to the right conclusions about this. If you have kids, the number one thing I implore you to do is teach them critical thinking skills. Teach them logic. Teach them about logical fallacies. I would point you as well to Peter Boghossian, who does this thing called street epistemology, where he has people, these maths from strongly agree to strongly disagree, and he has prompts. And so, oftentimes people will stand on the opposite, super disagree, super agree, and then he asks them, explain why the other person is standing where they are standing. Give the best argument you can, and then the other person will tell them if they're right or not. That's the best thing we can do if that habit is sealed in.
Thank you. It's actually not a question. So, the prime sponsor of the bill is tomorrow, and does everyone have paper or a phone? Here's what you can do tonight when you get home, because so I'm on the HHS committee, HHSEA, Health, Human Services, and Elderly Affairs. My committee is hearing these bills tomorrow. I am introducing them to my own committee. I'm the vice chair of the committee. I cannot then preside in the committee. I can't ask these wonderful folks questions. So I'm reliant on my fellow committee members, some of them in this room, Matt Drew and Stephen Kesselring. Brave, they're brave. So, there's Susan. Yeah, Sue Delama. Sorry, you're sitting over there. But anyway, here's what you can do tonight, because we are inundated as legislators with emails from the other side against these bills. So when you get home tonight, email hhsea@gc.nh.gov. And just real quick say, I support HB 377 and 712. Let kids be kids, protect our kids, whatever. It doesn't have to be long. Just show the legislature that we get so many emails from the other side. Let's tonight, right before they hear the bills in the morning, just bam, you know what? There are actually people in support of this. Yep. We know there are, we just don't hear from them as loud as we do from the other side.
Can you repeat that one more time?
Yeah, so email hhsea@gc.nh.gov. And what's going to happen is we're going to hear the bills tomorrow, and then a week from now, we are going to going into executive session where my committee will vote on these bills. And that vote decides how they will enter the House floor. Probably on March 20th is when they will hit the House floor. We are hoping, and I am pretty confident, these bills will go to the House floor to pass. Okay? And it's my goal in life to pass these. All right? For New Hampshire. Thank you. Yeah. 377 is the one in the morning, that's the puberty blocker one. And then 712 is in the afternoon. That's the surgery one. And remember, we did pass no bottom surgery on minors last year with just a 2-person majority. We have a 40-person majority now. So I'm really hopeful that we can do this. Thank you.